Policymakers have advocated embracing failure as a means to encourage entrepreneurship. What is failure in entrepreneurship, and should it really be celebrated?
I think there's a little bit of confusion about the use of the term failure, and I want to try and tease out the different elements of it. First of all, there is a call, and I've heard calls to celebrate failure. I went to a panel discussion at the Global Competitiveness Forum in Riyadh in January 2012 this year, to a session on the art of failure. And I want to make clear that from the entrepreneur's perspective, failure is a very bad thing, and it should remain a bad thing. In other words, it's a state to be avoided. Entrepreneurship will never succeed if people think failure is good. They should think that success is good. Failure is what happens when you don't succeed. I failed in a venture, and believe me, I struggled extremely hard not to fail. It devastated me when I did fail, and my partners as well. It was very painful. And I think that entrepreneurs should do everything they can to succeed. Let's not lose sight of the fact that the creation and capture of extraordinary value is what entrepreneurship is about. It's not about the destruction or the loss of value. That's from the entrepreneur's perspective. So let's not get carried away with celebrating failure from the entrepreneur's side. That's very different from encouraging risk-taking. So from the policy side, if you look at cultures that are very entrepreneurial, you do see a lot of churn. In other words, you see companies that will fail relatively quickly. You'll see a lot of company formation, and you'll see a lot of company closure. That is essential to economic development, using entrepreneurship as a wedge or as a strategy for economic development. You won't see a very entrepreneurial society take root if you don't see a lot of failure. Again, allowing it is different from celebrating it. So allowing it is partly a structural issue. It's partly cultural, it's partly structural. And what I mean by structural is bankruptcy laws and easy entrance into bankruptcy, decriminalizing bankruptcy, destigmatizing bankruptcy is an essential part of encouraging firm formation and allowing firms to exit when they're not successful. So that's a policy that can encourage risk-taking and also reduce the costs of failure. Again, that's different from celebrating failure. A second policy is labor flexibility. When you see labor rigidity or restrictions on the ability to terminate employment, again, you see it's much more difficult for entrepreneurs to entry. An interesting paradox is that when it's difficult to exit, it's also difficult to entry. So in order to get more entrepreneurship, you have to make it easy for entrepreneurs to stop. That means partly labor flexibility and partly the bankruptcy issue. There's a third element, and that is learning from failure. So again, it's different from celebrating failure, but it's very important to learn from failure. I can say, as someone who has a significant failure in his background as an entrepreneur, that the lessons that I learned from that failure, I could never have learned from a success. And I learned them very quickly and very painfully. When you take failure in very small doses, it's called making a mistake. It's not necessarily a failure. And I think it's also very important to be able to make mistakes, to take small risks if possible, it's not always possible, and to learn as quickly and as honestly as possible from those mistakes, those mini failures, let's call them. So, failure from the entrepreneur's perspective is a bad thing. Risk-taking is an essential part, so the willingness to risk failure is essential. And the importance from a policy perspective is to make firm failure easy. And from an educational perspective, it's very important to make failure the fodder of learning and improvement.